Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Weekly MTG because it's in the morning.
It is in the morning.
We've got Brian Hawley here.
Hello.
And we are revealing so many cards from Double Masters 2022 today. So we've got, you can see down at the bottom, we got previews, and like a good mixtape, burned CD, or playlist, this show is all Rise. So we're going to start out by talking about some of the commons and uncommons and the draft archetypes, so that when you crack one of these packs and start drafting, you know what's going on and what you're working towards. Then we're going to get to some spicy stuff in the rares and mythics. Yeah, and we're ending on a doozy. We'll get to that. We will get to that and more in a moment, but first, one bit of news. Earlier this week, we announced a very special event, Magic 30. This is taking place in Las Vegas, October 28th through 30th, and it's going to be the kickoff to the celebration of Magic's 30th year. And there's going to be a ton of stuff at this event. If you head to magic.gg right now, you can learn a bit about it, see the save the date notice, and see some of the stuff happening at that event. But come July, we will start selling tickets and we will have all of the details. More details than you could possibly ever need for what is going on at that show and what all of the ticketing options will be. But by that time, people will have seen and played Double Masters. We're in Double. It's one of the Masters. Double Masters 2022. So we're just going to get started. So first of all, Brian, what was your so the people at home know where you're coming from? What was your role with this set?
So I was the lead set designer for the latter portion. The first portion of Double Masters 2022 was led by Gavin Verhey, and I took over for the kind of second half. Master sets have kind of slightly less formal, like vision design, set design breakdown. So it was more Gavin did the first part and I did the second part, and Gavin was leading as we kind of established the what the archetypes were, what the top line was, kind of the core premise of this set. And I took over for the sort of making all of the archetypes stick, making all of the kind of structural elements work, and just making sure that all of the cards were kind of cool and pointed you in interesting and novel directions.
Yeah. Now, for those who don't know, if you're newer to Magic, Masters sets generally, so this is Double Masters. The Masters part means this is an all reprint set, correct?
It is. With one exception.
With one exception. So actually, you know what, that's a great segue. Let's talk about that exception because it is a bit of an odd duck, and it's our first preview card. It is called Cryptic Spires. And this is a completely new card. And it says, as you create your deck, circle two of the colors below. Those are words we haven't seen on a card before. Cryptic Spires enters the battlefield tapped. Tap, add 1 mana of either of the circled colors. What is going on with this card?
A lot of things are going on with this card. So this set was one of the most interesting kind of design architecture, kind of the underpinnings of this limited format are some of the more complicated puzzles I've ever seen in limited. So the core premise of the set that Gavin and I decided on in that first part of design is that this is a 3-color draft format. One of the things that master sets really like to do is sort of taking something we normally do in Magic and sort of condensing it and having a like very decadent, very kind of saturated, enriched version of that. So we've done 3-color limited sets before, in which you could draft 5 of the limited 3-color trios.
We just had Streets of New Capenna, for example.
We did.
Yeah.
In this one, all 10 work. The intention for this draft format is that it is primarily, though not exclusively, as with all draft formats, a 3-color draft format in which you can draft any of the 10 3-color trios, and all of them are viable, functional, have interesting identity and flair to them. So Cryptic Spires was a tool that we've kind of had in our back pocket for a while. It's something that we came up with as an idea for, I don't even remember the project, it was many years ago, but the thing that we found with it is that the It is very good at ensuring that players have access to the right amount of fixing without having to kind of absorb all of the fixing from the table.
Okay.
So in our early explorations with making this 3-color limited set tick, a lot of our kind of experiments with different distributions of dual lands or different distribution of tri-lands got us to a point where people were either taking tons and tons of those and kind of devolving into this like 4 and 5 color soup where most of the draft decks at the table looked basically the same. And we needed to come up with something that made it possible to play any of the 3-color archetypes without everything just kind of devolving into that soup.
Sure.
So this is what we came up with.
Okay.
This is the kind of answer to that puzzle that we landed on. And it's definitely a specific mechanism for this set that it is a card that you draft like any other in the booster packs.
Okay.
And it essentially allows you to prioritize fixing independently from the colors you're choosing. Because another thing that we found early on is that when it was the fixing that indicated what colors you're playing rather than the cards, that was a pretty unsatisfying experience.
Sure.
Like if you just had to take lands first, second, and third pick of every draft, and then
if you happen to see only green-blue lands, that would dictate that color pair.
So early on in design, that's kind of like how some of our experiments went, and Cryptic Spires was the way that we found to kind of get out of that knot.
Cool. Yeah, I think is interesting about it, and I'm very much looking forward to the Frank Karsten analysis that goes through like what your mana base looks like when you have a Cryptic Spires or 3 in your deck. But it's fixing, you know, oftentimes in 3 colors it'll be like 2 colors and a splash, or you'll get strong fixing for like one part of it and not the other. And Cryptic Spires is flexible. If you are white, blue, black, it can be white, blue. It can be blue, black. It can be white, black, depending on your other fixing, depending on the distribution. So people who really love mathy mana bases are really going to enjoy that. But also it just helps you. Okay, so let's talk about these archetypes. So we're going to go through all 10 archetypes. We're going to show cards from all 10 archetypes. We're going to focus on the commons and uncommons, but there's some spicy stuff in here. So let's start with, where else would we start? It's my show. We're going to start with white, blue, black, or otherwise known as Esper Flicker. Flicker value, you'll see my boy there on the right side, Muldrifter, but what is this archetype all about?
So kind of in keeping with that kind of flexibility of colors and flexibility of mana bases, a kind of recurring theme across all of these archetypes is that many of the pieces are interchangeable. So in a 2-color set, a monocolor common is available for 40% of your archetypes.
Sure.
In a 3-color set, it's available to 60% of your archetypes. So they essentially need to pull double duty and go in a bunch of different places. The other corollary is that they wind up relatively flexible. Like you can build this flicker value deck, like maybe you want to play, you find some sweet red cards and swap out your black cards. But the core of this archetype and kind of the place where flicker value is centered is you have creatures with strong enters the battlefield triggers, and you have ways to either bounce or exile and return them, often repeatedly, as in the case of Momentary Blink. There are white, blue, and black have more strong enter the battlefield than other colors, though obviously it's something that just appears in Magic. And it also has some kind of specific synergies, like you'll see here, where you can evoke your Ether Snipe and Momentary Blink it on the stack.
Right. Or Muldrifter, or you can do Muldrifter. Yeah, that's 4 cards.
That's 4 cards. It's a lot of cards.
It's a lot of cards.
And you still have the second half of Momentary Blink.
I remember doing that in Standard. I'm definitely doing that in Draft. Anyway, keep going. Yes. I'm geeking out over Muldrifter here.
There's a lot to geek out about. Yeah, I mean, that is the basic bones of the archetype. It tends to be somewhat mid-rangey. Like most of your game plan is kind of having a bunch of things to do in the mid-game that sort of propel you into a dominant position.
Sure.
It obviously has some kind of more expensive cards in Vampire Sovereigns and Aether Snipes that provide you some late game power.
Cool.
But,
and then one other cool aspect of this set is that even the commons and uncommons, some of the more beloved cards, like Muldrifter, have fancy versions. And so here we see the borderless version of Muldrifter, which I could use 12 of. So we're going to see more of these as we go along. But yeah, on the right there, that is the fancy borderless version of Muldrifter. All right, let's take a look at our next archetype. This is Grixis. You're calling it Graveyard Midrange. So tell us about this archetype.
This one is one of the more, I'd say this could be the trickiest archetype to draft in the set.
Okay.
It has a lot of different ways you can build it, and a lot of it's about accruing incidental value while keeping pressure on. So cards like Seeker Squire and Unearth allow you to kind of get pretty mana favorable exchanges here. You're kind of getting a relatively strong, like you're getting incidental value out of the Seeker Squire, potentially putting something in your graveyard. You can unearth it and get a 3-mana creature for 1 mana. Similarly, like Advanced Stitchwing, you can apply pressure in the early to mid game kind of at an accelerated rate and kind of pull ahead that way. But it can also be, like most mid-range decks, it can kind of transition into that sort of grindy, controlling element where you're casting cards by Pirate's Pillage, discarding Advanced Stitchwing, going up on cards with other similar effects. You can use the Muldrifter from last time. It's a card that does a lot of rolls.
And I will. That's going to go in every blue deck I draft. Whatever. Yeah. Cool. And this archetype we have, so not every we don't have a fancy version of a card from every archetype, but we do have one from this one. And that Unearth there, which gets played in a lot of formats, has a fancy borderless version over there on the right at the common slot. Yep, I know a lot of Pauper players are going to want to pick that up. All right, next archetype. We are 1/5 of the way through the archetypes. Let's keep going. I like this. This next archetype is just called Classic Jund. Classic Jund, what's going on here?
This one, definitely what it says in the box. So Jund is an archetype that's been, if you go deep into Magic history, kind of called the Rock. It's sort of, it is a mid-range deck that is trying to be both aggressive and very, very resilient. So most of your creatures are trying to be down. You pair that with very efficient removal. Your creatures have kind of a layer of redundancy with things like Brindleshote and Dreg Mangler. You can often get extra value out of them, perhaps by sacrificing them, perhaps by trading them, perhaps by unearthing them. You can kind of recur your creatures, and they like keep pressure on throughout the game, so that you can kind of pull ahead. You are often trying to kind of interact heavily, kill a bunch of opposing creatures, keep the board clear for your relatively contained mid-range board. And we'll often find ways, especially from the rare slot, which this is a Double Master set, you have a lot of rares in your draft decks, to kind of go over the top and dominate a relatively empty board by the time you get to that point.
And I do want to emphasize one of the points you just brought up, because we haven't talked about it yet. And again, if people haven't drafted this is only the second Double Masters.
It is.
What does the double mean?
So the double means you get 2 rares in every pack. You also get 2 foils in every pack. In the draft format, each time you open a pack, you get to take 2 cards as your first pick. After that, you only take 1 card, as is normal in draft. But the kind of implication of that is that with 2 rares in every pack, you wind up with a lot more rares in your decks than you would in a set with only 1 rare per pack. So the limited format kind of needs to respect that, and it dovetails with just how many rares there are. Some of that comes in terms of the commons and uncommons being pretty flexible. Because the rares are often the ones kind of providing very unique effects and using cards in very different ways.
Yep.
So the commons and uncommons are going to be kind of very modular building blocks that allow you to kind of work with what you find. There's also some kind of the removal is kind of, again, stronger and more flexible. Rares have a much broader range of things that they might do. The non-creature permanents with very powerful effects are more common in the rare slot than in common and uncommon. So the and like they're going to be powerful, but it's important that people can interact with them and play a reasonable game of limited. That isn't entirely defined by the rare slot.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thrust of the set. Is it's just more powerful. It is you've got twice as many rares in any given draft, and then you've also picked those rares to be some of the more powerful rares in Magic's history. Okay.
So one of the kind of driving philosophies for designing master sets, specifically the limited environment, is to kind of capture this sort of platonic ideal of kind of casual constructed. Cube formats often do a very similar thing. Where it's sort of you get to see cards that you wouldn't necessarily have seen played before, especially in this context. Like in the context of limited, like kind of finding new environments to place cards into, like pulling a card from a commander deck that you've never seen in a draft before, and sort of like having that limited experience look kind of like the casual constructed experience if you kind of built around that card, and curating it in that way does make for, especially with the extra rares and just kind of the slightly higher power level of just the cards across the set in general. Does go for more of that. It feels at least one and possibly more steps towards constructed. Kind of exists in that middle ground, similar to Cube.
Makes sense. So 2 rares, 2 foils, 2 first picks. All right, cool. All right, we've gone more than 60 seconds without a preview card. Let's get back to it. Next archetype is Heroic Aggro. So if you're familiar with Theros especially, Heroic was an ability that whenever you targeted a creature, you usually put a +1/+1 counter on it. There are also some Heroic-like abilities. We see Hero of the Games over there, which basically has Heroic-ish. So what is this archetype aiming to do?
So this is definitely one of the more aggressive archetypes in the set. It is trying to relatively quickly kind of build up a couple of creatures, target them with spells, and develop a very big board very quickly that way. The archetype plays relatively similarly to how you might remember it from Theros. But we get some interesting gems and sort of cross-set and cross-color tricks that you can pull.
Well, even Gnarlback Rhino is it's not a card I've thought of as this is a heroic card, but very obviously it is. The text does the same thing, but it draws you cards, which I'm a fan of.
Gnarlback Rhino might be my favorite find for the common slot in the whole set.
I believe that.
It's just a really cool, fun card, but it is not one that most people have experienced, and has never been in a draftable set before. And the opportunity to put it in a draftable set only comes around when we do something like this. Obviously, like some number of years from now, if we return to Heroic, we could maybe find a home for it, but the likely scenario is that we would make a new card that does something similar. As it's unclear whether Gnarlback Rhino specifically would fit the creative of whatever. So anyway, it is just a very cool card that appeared in a pre-constructed deck, and kind of recontextualizing it into this limited format just gives a really cool card and gives a very different flavor of Heroic than we experienced in Theros. I will say this deck is a little bit, it is not quite as kind of all-in aggressive as the Heroic decks from Theros sometimes wound up being.
Sometimes you get to draw cards.
we did kind of lean into the effects like Gnarlback Rhino, where sometimes you are getting different reasons for wanting to do things with Heroic. And we also gave you, there are a higher number of things that target multiple creatures, as with Thrive, to be able to allow you to kind of build up a mid-sized board and target a bunch of things at once to get kind of a sweeping burst of value.
All right. Cool. Speaking of big bursts of value, let's look at our next archetype, the Bant Big Ramp archetype. So we've got some Rampant Growth, some Elvish Rejuvenator, Annoyed Altasaur. There's Aether Snipe and Settle Beyond Reality again. So this is where you were talking about, we're going to see some repeated cards. This is where you're talking about cards serving multiple purposes across multiple archetypes.
They will. Again, going back to that kind of concept that monocolored cards need to pull even more weight here into going into multiple archetypes. Limited always has part of the exercise being kind of how do you blend different archetypes so that people can either pivot or people are kind of competing for cards for different reasons. If everyone has the exact same priority order for all of the cards in the set, the limited format is pretty dull. So having them serve different roles in different decks kind of gives a lot of interesting texture to what you want and when. So this archetype is definitely just trying to go really big. It is trying to generate lots of mana. It is going to be one of the archetypes that is going to be, your play experience is kind of defined by your rares in a lot of times in this archetype. Because especially when we're talking about like the higher mana value 3-color cards, there's only so much, like you'll be able to fill in your deck with 6 drops and such, and 7 drops like Annoyed Altasaur and Aether Snipe. But it's likely that the thing that really made you want to get to 7 mana is something a little bit higher up in the rarity. And so that recurring theme of Aether Snipe and Settle Beyond Reality are probably the top end of your Esper Flicker value deck.
Okay.
Here they're probably the middle of your curve.
All right.
You're probably trying to play Elvish Rejuvenator on 3, Settle Beyond Reality on 4, exile their creature and get another land out of your Elvish Rejuvenator, keep going. Whereas in the Esper Flicker value, it's probably one of your higher cost cards, one of your more impactful cards, and you're more trying to do that a bunch of times in a row, whereas this is just bridging you to the end game.
Makes sense. And one of these cards has a special version, a borderless version. Of course, it's the classic Rampant Growth, which has the borderless version right there on your screen.
I love this one.
Yeah,
I really love this.
It's gorgeous. All right, next up, I am going to throw producer Sean for a little bit of a loop because, you know what, chat? You've been good. And I think it's time to show off one of the mythic rares from the set. Or rares.
Sounds great.
We're just going to take a little break from the archetype, throw up a card chat's been asking for. They've been asking for it. They've been asking nicely. Yeah. They've been polite.
We talked about it earlier this morning.
We did. So let's throw up Dockside Extortionist. So Dockside Extortionist is in the set. You'll see 3 different versions here. The main set version on the left, the borderless version right there in the middle, and then foil etched. So there are foil etched versions of many of the rares and mythics in this set. So yeah, 3 different versions. Choose which one you like. Yeah, very powerful card, really powerful in Commander especially.
Very powerful.
Does this, so we've talked about a few archetypes so far. Does this fit into any of the archetypes specifically?
It does. One of the things that's really important for Masters sets is every rare, they shouldn't be red herrings. They might not be like the most perfect fit that are directly supporting your archetype.
Sure.
But they should go somewhere. Like the main purpose, of course, is just there are a bunch of cards from throughout Magic's history for all kinds of formats, whether that's Modern or Legacy or Commander. Definitely the set leans into Commander appeal in the rares and mythics in with cards like Dockside Extortionist.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do have some ways that you can use this one in particular. It's definitely not going to be as powerful in limited. It's unlikely that your opponent has a lot of artifacts in this heavily multicolored set.
Yep.
But they might have a few, and if you can get 2 treasure out of this, you're doing pretty well for yourself.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, treasures are things you sacrifice. They're little tokens lying around that you can do what you want, and so they might fit into this next archetype. I don't know. I'm sort of guessing. The next archetype is Mardu Sacrifice. So this is the deck that looks to sacrifice things for value, and I know there's some Pauper players in chat.
Yeah.
Which card on this screen should they be paying attention to?
It's probably Doom Traveler.
I mean, well, to be fair, yes, Doom Traveler is very strong.
No, Dark Roller Oracle is a really interesting case. So this archetype is trying to do a very kind of classic thing. It's been called Aristocrats many times because of cards like Cartel Aristocrat.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, you're trying to find kind of very replaceable fodder, things that come with kind of multiple creatures to sacrifice in one body.
Doom Traveler, yep.
You're looking for reasons why you might want to sacrifice them and effective ways to do so.
Yeah.
So another of the puzzles with this set is making sure that, like, when we're creating these 3-color archetypes like Sacrifice, having reasonable commons and uncommons somewhat equally weighted through all 3 of the colors. Because of how flexible many of the pieces are, if most of the strength of an archetype were in, for instance, white and black, then it becomes very easy to make either, to just make white, black, whatever version of this archetype. And again, once we start doing that, it becomes very difficult to navigate the limited format. If you kind of always have access to 6-ish archetypes, even if you've already settled into all 3 of your colors. So when we're looking through for kind of interesting sacrifice outlets in red, Dark Roller Oracle definitely kind of jumped out as a card that is just very cool.
It was cool enough to be a rare when it was
cool
originally
enough to be a rare. Unfortunately, it was not really powerful enough to be a rare in its original format.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a card that kind of fell by the wayside, and kind of bringing it back and giving it new life here. It's also something, one of the things that we consider especially when we're downshifting cards, which we do in master sets. It's not like, obviously, like many of the cards have their original rarities, but to make the limited format tick, is sort of a found art experiment. You know, we're working with the pieces we have, and when we're looking for ways to kind of fill out the curve and fill out kind of a variety of different effects so that limited archetypes play out differently each time you play, we do occasionally find ourselves in a spot like this where where Dark Roller Oracle could have been either a common or an uncommon. One of the things that sort of tipped it towards, like, this is actually a really cool common in this set specifically, is that it gives the deck a pretty different dimension.
Sure.
Like, similarly to how Heroic was historically a pretty, like, direct at you beatdown deck. Aristocrats often plays out similarly to a combo deck where you're kind of just moving a bunch of things around, sacrificing a bunch of stuff, draining them for small amounts of life 10 or 15 times in a row, getting you a little bit further into your deck and kind of helping you, like, if your primary plane doesn't work out. Dark Roller Oracle is just a card that was really fun to have very consistent access to in these decks, and we found the power level to be pretty reasonable for a common in this sort of more casual constructed cube-like power band.
Makes sense. All right, next archetype, we are going to talk about mid-range ramp in Teamer. So we've seen 2 of these cards before, Elvish Rejuvenator, Muldrifter, we've seen Pirate's Pillage, and then there's Stormfleet Pyromancer. So what gives this a different flavor than, say, like the Bant ramp deck?
So Stormfleet Pyromancer gives a little bit of a hint. The Bant ramp deck is usually trying to, ramp a bunch. It's often trying to cast 6, 7, even 8 mana permanents.
Yeah.
It's trying to come in way over the top with something very huge. The Teamer midrange ramp is usually trying to, I mean, we've actually seen 3 of these cards before. It's often trying to kind of get incidental value and then use that to attack. It's trying to cast multiple spells in the mid-game. It's trying to use all of its mana each turn. It's drawing enough cards to make sure that it still has fuel to keep throwing onto the board.
Yep.
But it's usually trying to get to a point where it's just doing more in the mid-game and the kind of later mid-game than the opponent, as opposed to continuing to not do very much and kind of bridge into something huge.
Yeah, makes sense.
So it's more often trying to get to a point where it's casting a 3-mana spell and a 4-mana spell on turn 5 or 6 instead of
1 5 6 mana spell, 7 mana.
Right.
Yep. Cool. All right. Next up, the archetype is +1/+1 counters. It's white, it's black, it's green. It's got all of these cards in it. 4 of them we haven't seen before, but I'd say, what's this archetype trying to do? But it seems pretty obvious.
It's pretty obvious. This is one that I have a hard time not putting in every Masters set. +1/+1 counters are a theme that we've done many times. One of the things that's really kind of fun to play with and explore when we're designing and creating Master sets is, especially when we have a blend of cards that enable an archetype from kind of one block, one world, some mechanics, and we pick up the kind of payoffs or the lords or whatever it is that's sort of like encouraging you to do it from a different one. So this is a really good example where in Tarkir, Outlast was a relatively inefficient way to put counters on your creatures, but the rewards for doing so were often pretty strong.
Yeah.
So especially when you start getting to the higher mana cards, having like those +1/+1 counter payoffs, you get pretty powerful rewards for doing it.
Yeah.
And then when we go to other worlds like Ixalan or Ravnica, you often are able to pick up +1/+1 counters or creatures that come with +1/+1 counters relatively cheaply.
Sure.
And kind of having that blend of different flavors of +1/+1 counters across different blocks and across different eras of Magic they kind of weave into a different flavor of deck than you've seen in either place.
Sure.
And kind of having those cards exist in a different context and kind of just play out a little differently than you remember. Like, it's the same card that you remember, but the context being different kind of helps it shine a little bit more.
Makes sense. All right, let's get to one of my favorite archetypes. It's got blue in it. You could play Muldrifter in it, but it's not really the point. This is Jeskai Prowess. So we've got Seeker of the Way, Bloodwater Entity, Rift Bolt, and Thought Scour. So tell us a bit about this archetype.
This is a very classic Jeskai Prowess deck. It's something that we've gone to enough times with the blue-red archetype in various kind of more modern sets. There's also kind of just enough white payoffs for it to kind of have it be that kind of cohesively Jeskai deck. A lot of the instants and sorceries that are very popular, and especially modern and legacy, tends to be pretty low mana value. It's something that shows up in those formats quite a bit.
Yep.
Is it Phoenix decks, the Dragon Rage Channeler decks?
Yep.
This is an archetype that plays out quite a bit in competitive constructed as well as in casual constructed, and kind of having this expression of it where we pair it with kind of a wider range of things. It's definitely a less focused version of the deck than you would play in a legacy tournament, but it is something that is definitely kind of more cohesive and tight than a typical draft deck, I would say.
Yeah. And now this screen up here, we got 2 cards on here that have fancy borderless versions.
Makes up for the ones that didn't have one.
It does. It does. First, we have Seeker of the Way. You see the version on the right there with new art, fancy borderless version. And then we have one of my favorite cards, Thought Scour, with some.
It's a nice one.
It is. It's got the fairies doing their thing.
Yeah, this art made me laugh for a solid 15 or 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Just nonstop. I definitely got some weird looks. People are like, "What are you laughing at?"
Thought
Like,
Scour.
look at this.
Have you seen this
They're
Thought
scrubbing.
Scour? Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that the art team, which definitely not my area, I just admire the work. Does is it does kind of often in the same way that we recontextualize cards into new environments, kind of playing with concepts and especially like looping in older legacy Magic artists,
sure,
or just kind of like re-envisioning what this name might mean.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I love it. And Thought Scour is a multi-format all-star, so that
For sure.
that borderless version is going to see a lot of play. All right, one more archetype, and then we're going to get to some rares and mythics. All right, last archetype is Sultai Graveyard Growth. What is going on here?
So this one is a much more graveyard-centered version of the graveyard archetype than, for instance, Grixis. Grixis is using the graveyard to provide additional value. This one is all in on the graveyard. It is looking for ways. It is going to highly value things that just mill its own cards. Spoilers, Balustrade Spy should usually target yourself. Not always, most of the time.
Yep.
And you're hoping to hit cards like Deep Analysis, or you're hoping to fill up your graveyard for cards like Webweaver Changeling. At higher rarities, obviously, we're going to see more splashy, exciting, kind of quirky versions of these. But the core of the archetype is, as you put cards from your library in your graveyard, or discard them by looting or whatever, you are going to incidentally find cards that operate out of the graveyard, or you will have cards in your hand that either bring them back or
enhanced by the
them.
Yep. Cool. Makes sense. All right, that's it for the draft archetypes. That was 10 draft archetypes.
Yep.
You can do all of them in Double Masters Draft. Now, let's talk about the fancy stuff: the rares, the mythics, the treatments. One of the treatments I want, so we don't have a preview card that has this treatment today. We actually showed a few of these in the pre-beat. But if you missed that, we did want to show off this really cool textured foil treatment. So this is Liliana the Last Hope. We revealed this before, but we made this cool video and we wanted to use it again just to show off that kind of treatment. That's what an etched foil will look like in real life.
Textured foil.
Textured foil. Sorry, textured foil. There are etched foils in this set, but this is a textured foil. Okay, but that's a card people have already seen. So we are going to. So this first rare, it's not the most exciting rare on this list, but it is emblematic of something going on in this set that we are going to see some exciting versions of in the set. So the first card I want to talk about is Ferexian Tyranny. So, you know, this sees some commander play. It's a rather old card. It's got the original art, which is cool. So, what is this emblematic of in the set?
So the 3-color theming that we talked about a bunch with the limited format does extend to the rares and mythics. Like a bunch of cards in the set that would normally be very difficult to cast in a limited format actually work here.
Yeah.
And one of the things we look for, especially in a set where we have, so many rares.
Yeah.
Because we not only have twice as many rares in the packs, there's twice as many rares in the set.
Yep.
Are looking for kind of cool old cards. People may have forgotten about them.
Yep.
They still play very well. They're still cool, fun, sweet cards. And cards like Ferexian Tyranny, other than the list, this is the first time it's been in a modern border.
Yeah.
Definitely the first time it's been foil etched.
Yep.
So, for that person that just loves this card, their Nekusar deck or whatever it is you got to be able to find it here.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are going to be more like 3-color cards getting sort of their first time reprint in this set, correct? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. You'll have to stay tuned. We don't have any more of those. But what we do have is the next card, which has 3 different versions and is quite exciting. Teferi's Protection. So Teferi's Protection is an instant for 2 and a white, and until your next turn, your life total can't change. You gain protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out, and then it exiles itself. But you see there 3 different versions. So there's the main set version, there's the borderless version with different art, and then there is a foil etched version over there on the right.
This one is particularly funny because the original printing is the last time that Gavin Verhey handed off a set to me.
Okay.
It was originally printed in Commander 2017, which was a Gavin vision design.
Yep.
And me set design.
Yeah. Yeah, and this has been reprinted before, but it was in I think it was in a secret layer, if I'm remembering correctly. So yeah, get your Teferi's Protection in a booster release. All right. Next up, a favorite of mine, and I know a Commander favorite as well, Bloom Tender, another one that gets the 3 version treatment. So you've got the main set version, then you've got the alternate art borderless version right there in the middle, and then foil etch on the right. Now, I imagine this card plays pretty well in a 3-color format.
It is very strong.
Yeah.
This is one of those rares that is both very appealing, very beloved in Commander, very nice to have in the limited format.
Yeah.
It meshes really well. It's definitely one of the more kind of like, yes, this one just has to be in the set.
Yep.
There's no other place we would want it to be.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I've played this card in a lot of Commander decks. It can be really powerful in the right deck, and certainly in a deck with a bunch of 3-color cards is going to be pretty standout. All right, our last preview card, and then we're going to get to Q&A. So if you have questions for Brian, or I guess me, but Brian's here. You can ask him questions. Feel free to put those in chat. So this last card, we're going to drum it up a little bit, but this is also a first-time reprint.
It is.
And
it's been a long time.
It has been a long time. Tee this card up.
So this card is one of those cards that, when I was a player and playing in tournaments and such, I'm not sure I ever saw a physical copy of this card.
I feel like I have, but I don't think I've ever touched one, for example.
I've definitely never touched one.
Yeah.
It's a card that I always knew about. It's a card that I always wanted. I'm very excited to finally find a home for and finally be able to show it more of the light of day here.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, let's show the light of day on Imperial Seal. A bunch of people guessed this in chat. Good job, chat. So again, Imperial Seal gets the 3 different versions. There's the main set, the borderless, and the foil etched. A lot of people have been asking for this card for a long time. Very excited. Portal 3 Kingdoms, for those who don't know, because it's been a hot minute.
It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. Portal 3 Kingdoms was an introductory set, but it was flavored after some East Asian lore, and it was a very small release. It was also white bordered at the time.
It was.
Yeah.
Even though it was a very odd release.
Yeah.
And the reason that I've potentially never seen a physical copy of this card up until somewhat recently, was they're very hard to find.
Yeah.
Portal 3 Kingdoms was a very small print run.
Well, they weren't even at the time. They weren't even tournament legal. They are legal in Legacy and Vintage now, but at the time it was just sort of here's this thing where you can learn to play Magic and
and many of the cards are in the set are quite weak. The kind of interesting thing with Imperial Seal, Portal and Portal Second Age and Portal 3 Kingdoms didn't have instants in them. So this card is, in the context of that environment, very similar to the card Vampiric Tutor, but by virtue of every instant became a sorcery, many of them with very strange additional text allowing you to cast them at times that you would cast instants. We wound up with cards like Imperial Seal, and it is a very powerful card, even though it is sorcery as opposed to the instant of Vampiric Tutor. The fact that you can play both in Commander, and this card is very, very strong. Having access to any card in your deck for very little cost. I would imagine that many of the people in chat, despite asking for it, have also never seen.
Well, yeah, I would imagine. Now, so you mentioned, Portal 3 Kingdoms. You can answer yes or no on this. Are there any other first-time reprints from Portal 3 Kingdoms in this set?
There are.
There are.
Yes.
Okay. We'll have to wait and see on that one, chat. All right. Those are all the preview cards that we have. We have no more new cards. That said, we do have Brian Hawley still here, ready to answer your questions. I will note this is being streamed on both Twitch and YouTube. I can only have one chat up at a time. So we're taking questions from Twitch chat specifically this time. In the future, we're gonna figure out how to do both. But if you have questions for Brian in Twitch chat, please put them in, and we will ask him. We're not gonna. No, you cannot eat the delicious Imperial Seal. Okay, first question. How did the previous Master sets, so not just Double Masters, but Master sets generally, influence the draft environment for this one?
That's a really good question. The philosophy that I was kind of describing before of sort of Master sets want to be that kind of platonic ideal of casual constructed, kind of in the same way that Cube is, where it's like you're playing cards that you may not have seen before, you're kind of making do with the cards you have. You have a synergistic deck, but not all of your cards are like super tight focused deck lists. Is something that kind of like, it was present at the very beginning with the very first Modern Master set. It's definitely something that we've evolved over time. Another thing is that as we've done more and more Master sets over the years, we don't want to retread exactly the same ground that a previous Master set has done. Like, we're going to pick up some archetypes that we've seen before, some cards that have been in previous Master sets, but we do want to make sure that we're delivering a new experience. So with Double Masters and Double Masters 2022, we were looking for kind of an overarching theme for the set's limited archetypes, and just the limited format in general that kind of gave it a new twist, gave it something that you hadn't seen before that might be exciting, even if you played every single Master set since the very beginning. So I'd say that if this were the very first Master set ever, we probably wouldn't start with you can draft all 10 3-color trios. It's a very complicated design puzzle. It also requires some kind of new technology in the form of Cryptic Spires. So I'd say that like the main thing is just needing to exist harmoniously with all of the Master sets that have come before is what kind of led us to this next evolution of the limited format.
Makes sense. Next question. Are there other cards that have been downshifted for Pauper play? So we saw specifically Dark Dweller Oracle was downshifted from rare to common. We saw that, what was it, the Experiment 1 was downshifted from uncommon to common. I think that'll probably see some Pauper play. Should Pauper players expect more downshifts?
I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure there's at least one. I don't want to spoil.
You're saying one rare to common downshift, or just one?
No, I'm fairly confident, but will not 100% promise that there are no more rare to common downshifts. It is something that we do pretty sparingly.
Bolduvian Horde. I'm still mad about that one. We talked about that one before the show. Bolduvian Horde was my
hard case.
I was so proud of getting it when this was back in Alliances. I'm old. And then Masters 25 comes around and Bolduvian Horde's in it, which great. It's a common. It killed my soul a little bit. A little bit.
It's not something that we, like, it is something that we've done in, I'd say, more than half of the Master sets, but it isn't something that we do lightly or
Yeah.
flippantly. It's something that where we do consider it very carefully, and yes, they're. Yeah, that is the one.
Yes.
But there are other downshifts,
Yes.
just in the set in general.
Yeah. I'll answer this one. Are there new original cards, or is this a reprint set only? 99.9% of this set are reprints, and then there is Cryptic Spires, which if you missed that, producer Sean could put that back up on the screen. This is the one unique new card in the set, and Brian did a whole thing about how it helps the draft environment. Will this entire set come to MTG Arena? No, it will not. You can answer yes or no to this question.
Okay.
Is there any cool fairy stuff coming?
Fairy stuff coming. Oh, I'm trying to remember all the cards in the set. It's a pretty large set.
It is a pretty large set. I'm trying to think too. I mean, you can play Muldrifters and fairies.
You can.
Thought Scour is a fairies card.
There are some cards that you would be interested in playing in a fairies deck.
Okay. We'll take that answer. There's some questions about like you can answer this question. I'm going to say you can answer it.
Great.
How many Eldrazi are in the set?
Oh no, putting my memory to the test. There are. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not mixing up master sets.
I know the answer. Would you like a hint?
I would like a hint.
It's 3.
I'm pretty embarrassed
It's
that I can't
3.
remember.
Well, okay, I
couldn't remember if it
say
was
that,
one.
but I don't off the top of my head know if there's like a common or uncommon in there.
That's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah,
We'll say there at least 3.
There are at least 3. There we go. At least 3. Yeah, I was trying to think because
I can remember.
there was some Eldrazi that like would fit into the sacrifice archetype. Are they in the set? I can't remember. Yeah.
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 So depending on how
At least
specific and pedantic we want to get.
3. Yes. So let's see. So I'm going to ask you this question. You may not know the answer. So just to be clear on Brian's role, Brian is in charge of like putting the set together in terms of what cards go in it. And then there are other people who are in charge of things like what cards get what treatments. So Brian may know this from being in the meetings and absorbing it, but he may not. If he doesn't know the answers about like what cards get what treatments in what packs, I will point you to dailymtg.com, which is going to have an article going up. It will be up at 10, so in like 8 minutes. That will have all the details that you need for what cards and what treatments show up in what pack, et cetera, et cetera. So head to dailymtg.com. Sometimes Stibbs even hears me say that and then goes and posts it. Could even happen, but 10 o'clock is when that's time for. But anyway, back to the question. Is every single rare or mythic going to have a foil etched version?
So a little bit of context, just a little bit of additional context on the cards that get new artwork and special treatments that require new artwork.
The borderless versions.
Borderless versions.
Yes.
Those are chosen by the set lead.
Okay.
So the lead designer of the set is the one going through like which commons, which uncommons, which rares, and which mythics do we want to showcase.
So I can thank you for Muldrifter.
You can thank me for Muldrifter.
Thank you for Muldrifter. Okay. Yeah.
But the things like whether something has a textured foil or a borderless or both is a combination of the set lead weighs in occasionally. Like whether or not it has a borderless is definitely on me, but a lot of times, especially with the kind of new and unique treatments, a lot of it comes down to which cards are going to look especially cool in that treatment. Some treatments are really conducive to some kinds of artwork. And having, for instance, a textured foil is going to look very different on a card that has like a fairly monochromatic background as opposed to something that's like very intricate where all of the details are kind of interwoven and intricate.
Yep.
Which I already said. But so for foil etch specifically, my recollection, but again, you should probably check.
You should definitely, details are on Daily, he's doing this off memory, and it wasn't exactly his job. But DailyMTG.com will have details, but go on.
My recollection is that every rare and mythic in the set was foil etched.
Okay. I believe you're right.
I'll give it 80% confident.
I believe you're right.
But obviously the textured foils, borderless.
Yes.
The ones that require new art.
Yep.
Are kind of hand chosen and curated.
Yeah, and to everyone's question, are the textured foils a subset of the borderless cards? Yes. We did have a couple questions, and let's clarify this. Imperial Seal is not modern legal. What effect does this set, if any, have on format legality?
The set does not define format legality, with the one exception of Pauper.
Yep.
So master sets draw on a range of cards from across Magic's history. Some of them are going to be modern legal, some of them are going to be legacy legal, some of them, like Imperial Seal, not legal in Legacy,
yep,
are legal in Commander.
Yep.
So it is a card being reprinted in the set does not change where it is legal, except Pauper is an odd duck where legality in the format is defined by has it ever been printed anywhere?
At common, yeah.
At common.
Yep. All right. We only have a couple minutes left, so we're going to do like one or two more questions. Here's a question, and we've seen a lot of comments on it. So we saw a lot of Commander-focused reprints today. Should lovers of other formats be excited?
They should.
Okay. Good answer. One last question. I think we answered the rare to common shift. Yes, the collecting article is coming soon. It should be up on dailymtg.com very shortly, within the next 4 to 10 minutes is the range I'm giving for some reason. Make sure we land on a... there are some comments about the borderless Liliana and Cryptic Spires both having the same collector number. Pretty sure they don't, but we're going to look into that. That is probably just an image error. And, okay. What is the last question we're going to end on? We're not reprinting Black Lotus in this set. I will give that one away. Yeah. Okay, so I know you're not on the art side, but let's see if you can answer this. So sure. Richard Kane Ferguson confirmed he has 5 cards in this set. The question is, can we get a hint? Can you say anything about Richard Kane Ferguson's art in the set? It doesn't give anything away.
I can give a hint.
Okay.
So one of the things that we try to do is look for cards that, especially when we're drawing from legacy artists from the early days of Magic's history that are still beloved today.
Yeah.
We try to make sure that the cards we're giving them are, I would say, more recent cards that have only appeared in sort of the modern Magic context.
Okay. Okay. All right. There's your hint. There's your hit, Richard Kane Ferguson fans, which I count myself among. Okay. We're just about out of time. Thank you, Brian, for sharing all that knowledge with us. Thank you, chat, for joining us. So Double Masters previews have started. That's today. You'll start seeing them around the interwebs. There may be some others posted besides the ones we've been talking about. So if you head to dailymtg.com, that's going to be where you go for all your centralized information hub. There's going to be an article called Where to Find Double Masters 2022 Previews that's going to tell you where previews are going to be today. There's going to be a card image gallery that's going to show off what we talked about on this stream. There's going to be the collecting article that's going to give you all the nitty-gritty details on what treatment, on what cards, and what different boosters, all of that sort of stuff. So head to dailymtg.com. Previews for Double Masters 2022 are going this week through next week, so stay tuned for those. Next week on Weekly MTG, I'm not going to be here. I'm on vacation. So we'll be hosted by Chris Peeler, and he will have another guest from the team, Reggie Volk, and we'll share more previews.
Yeah.
More previews. Well, we're going to focus on Jeskai next week because that's what I decided I wanted to do, even though I'm not here. So thank you for tuning in to Weekly MTG, and we will see you next week.